In an age of unprecedented challenges, one institution stands at the intersection of policy, research, and action. The world's leading global policy school, Columbia SIPA. Here, amid the vibrant energy of New York City and in corridors of power around the globe, we're not just discussing critical challenges, we're actively shaping their solutions. Through innovative teaching, groundbreaking research, and strategic partnerships, we're addressing issues like climate change, democratic resilience, economic development, and international security. Our global institutes and interdisciplinary research centers are instrumental in convening world leaders, policymakers, and renowned experts, driving insights while also driving impact. And with more than 25,000 alumni spanning over 160 countries, our graduates are shaping policy at every level, from the World Bank to the White House to startups and NGOs. This moment calls for diverse perspectives, for new ideas and effort. SIPA defines pathways to action on the most critical issues of our time. This is where passion shapes purpose, where global voices unite, where meaningful solutions begin. This is our mission. This is Columbia SIPA.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Karen Yarhimilo. I'm the Dean of SIPA and the Adlai E. Stevenson Professor of International Relations. Welcome. Look around you. We are gathered in this historic building just blocks from the White House and the Washington Monument to celebrate SIPA's extraordinary legacy of training global leaders for over 75 years. Now, Columbia may call New York home, and yes, we have global centers spanning the world, but this year, we chose to celebrate SIPA right here in Washington, D.C. This decision underscores our deep commitment to strengthening SIPA's presence in the nation's capital and leveraging our incredible network of alumni and friends to further our mission. Now, speaking of alumni, let's see show of hands. Who's here is an MIA? Yeah. How about an MPA? Yeah. Let me say this loud and clear, even within earshot of Georgetown and Johns Hopkins, SIPA is the world's most global, most rigorous, and most impactful policy school, period. And yes, I'd say the same thing in Cambridge too. One of the things that I love most about being dean is that I cannot walk through the Pentagon or the White House without someone stopping me to say, I am SIPA, I went to SIPA. Our alumni are passionate, they're energized, they're deeply grateful for the skills and relationships they built here. DC is home to SIPA's second largest alumni community. And boy, what a force you are. Among us tonight are White House press secretaries, nuclear arm negotiators, intelligence analysts, members of Congress, senior diplomats, political consultants, economic advisors, military officers, and the list goes on and on. You are not just working in policy, you are on the front lines shaping it, and boy, do we need you now. This evening would not have been possible without a village of supporters. A special thank you to our sponsors, SIPA Advisory Board and Alumni Association leaders. Your vision propels us forward. And to our incredible SIPA team, especially our events, development, and alumni affairs staff, as well as our traveling faculty, your dedication and hard work made today possible. Thank you. And now, before I share SIPA's vision for the future, it is my honor to introduce Columbia University's interim president, Dr. Katrina Armstrong. Katrina is a brilliant medical leader and a humanist who has masterfully bridged public health, science, and policy throughout her career. In these challenging times, she has guided our university with remarkable strength and wisdom. I learn from her every day, and I'm deeply, deeply grateful that she has taken time from her very busy schedule to be with us here tonight. Thank you, Katrina.
Karen, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. For any of you who know Karen, when Karen asks, I come, let's just be clear. And I'm coming not only because of the remarkable dean and what Karen is doing, but because of my passion about SIPA, what is happening at SIPA, and the extraordinary community of student educators and alumni who keep this school at the forefront of research, teaching, and engagement on the issues that matter and have never, ever mattered more. So from classes with leaders who have served at the highest levels of government to pioneering research on the greatest policy challenges facing our world, SIPA is where you go, where you come if you want to make a difference. It's where you are if you want to engage with the brightest minds on the toughest problems. Consider difficult issues from diverse points of view and come up with concrete, actionable steps that can improve people's lives. It is such an honor for me to be here with Karen Yahimilo and three of her predecessors, Lisa Anderson, Thomas Christensen, and Merritt Janow, who have played such important roles in the evolution of this school and continue to serve as scholars and educators for future generations. Please join me in a round of applause for these remarkable leaders. I'm noticing that we have some women on the program here. As I say that we're also thrilled to have Hillary Clinton with us here tonight as a moderator. I knew it wouldn't be hard to get applause there. Hillary, a leader and SIPA professor whose experience and expertise remains peerless. We're also incredibly fortunate to be joined by one of my personal heroes, Claire Shipman, a distinguished, yeah, let's do it now. I've decided that in these times, we really need more applause. Claire is a distinguished journalist, a SIPA alumna, and a co-chair of our board of trustees who works tirelessly in the service of this institution that she loves. They join tonight a group of remarkable experts speaking and presenting at a showcase for SIPA and Columbia at our best, scholars, teachers, and leaders analyzing this momentous time and what it means for all of us. Before I end, I want to speak just briefly about universities and the current moment that we're in. I stand here because I believe that universities, institutions like Columbia, are invaluable to our society because of the role we play in creating knowledge, in fostering critical thinking, and investing in those future generations of leaders we so urgently need. It's something that we do well, and the results have spoken for themselves here at Columbia over the last 270 years. As a scientist and a doctor, I am sure that essentially everyone in this room has benefited from that science, from that investment, whether that's an antibiotic that you gave your child when they had an infection, the GPS that helped you navigate as you came here, or the mobile phone that I hope you've silenced before you sat down. However, I will say that this moment stands out as a test, not just for a university, but for all of us. We are living through an unprecedented time of unrest that has caused turmoil on our campus and regrettably a surge in anti-Semitism and a troubling and really heartbreaking intolerance for diversity of viewpoints. This unacceptable behavior has demanded our immediate attention, and we have focused on creating a campus that is safe and welcoming to all, with clear rules and consequences for breaking those rules. All of this is being done with the goal of making sure that our campus is the place where discussions and disagreements are rooted in facts and respectful debate, where tough conversations can be had with integrity and in the pursuit of learning. That is the essence of this university. That is the essence of SIPA, and that is what we are committed to doing. I know that this is not going to be easy. The challenges posed by recent executive action and our institutions mean that we must be aligned at this moment. But as president of this incredible university, I'm coming to tell you that I am deeply optimistic, that I know that we can address these challenges head on with unwavering resolve, collaboration, and creativity, with an incredible team of faculty and administrative leaders. I know that we will meet this moment with integrity, with leadership as stewards of this great institution should. And so I just want to thank everyone again, all the speakers here, our trustees here tonight, David Greenwald, Abby Elbaum, Dean DeColius, our Columbia faculty and attendants, including Jack Liu, who I'm just so delighted we recently welcomed back to Columbia. And to all our alumni who are here tonight, your support means the world to us. We couldn't do it without you. Thank you.
Thank you, Katrina. We are gathered here at a pivotal moment in history. As you know, SIPA was founded in the aftermath of World War II to train future leaders who could hopefully prevent future global conflict. While today's challenges, they're different, we find ourselves at another crossroads. Serving as SIPA's dean at this moment is both a profound honor and a humbling responsibility. We are entrusted with educating the next generation of leaders. Leaders who will shape the global order in ways we cannot yet imagine. We are living through an era of rapid global change, marked by geopolitical upheavals, technological transformations, democratic backsliding, and growing societal polarization. Meanwhile, here at home, we are witnessing seismic shifts from government agencies under threat to universities under siege. These changes affect all of us profoundly, including many in this very room. But uncertainty is not our enemy. You see, uncertainty, it's our catalyst. Now it's time to double down on our core values and push the boundaries of what SIPA can achieve. SIPA represents the very best of what universities can offer. And now, more than ever, the world needs SIPA's unbiased voice. It needs SIPA's local to global expertise. It needs SIPA's commitment to critical analysis and bold ideas. SIPA is not just an institution. It is a force for good in an uncertain world. And today, especially today, we must strengthen public trust in our institution and reaffirm the value of our expertise. Over the last decade, thanks to my brilliant predecessors and our world-class faculty, SIPA has grown into a global powerhouse of ideas. But we know that knowledge trapped in an ivory tower changes nothing. Ideas must be translated into action. They must reach decision makers to drive real impact. And this is why in 2023, Secretary Clinton and I launched the Institute of Global Politics, a hub that bridges scholars and practitioners to tackle the world's most pressing challenges. This is why last spring we launched IGP's Women's Initiative, and I'm thrilled to have Jen Klein and Rachel Vogelstein leading the charge. Thank you so much. And this is why we launched a new innovation lab in partnership with the French government, focused on understanding the profound challenges AI poses to democracy worldwide. And you will hear more about this today. Meanwhile, our faculty continue to produce groundbreaking research that is reshaping global policy. Their work is influencing sovereign debt strategies across the global south, US policy toward Ukraine, China, the Middle East, critical advancement in economic, technology policy, human rights, geopolitics, and climate solution. This is our secret sauce. Multiple disciplines, one mission. At SIPA, academics and practitioners work side by side, combining cutting-edge research, real-world experience, and policy expertise to advance innovative solutions. And just as important, SIPA is committed to modeling civil discourse and constructive dialogue. Because in today's world, whether you work in the White House or on Wall Street, the ability to engage across ideological divides is non-negotiable. And that is why we launched the Across the Aisle series, where conservative debates liberals, where global South perspective challenge US-centric ones, and where we break down silos, step outside our echo chambers, and come together to forge real solutions. Yeah. Because that's what SIPA is all about. Tonight, we celebrate this incredible community. We're also reaffirming our commitment to shaping the future of global policy. And with all of you, our alumni, our partners, and our friends, I have no doubt that SIPA's best days are still ahead. Okay, we have a lot of ground to cover, so let's get started. Our first panel is a critical, timely discussion, sure to generate penetrating insights, and it is my pleasure to introduce Economic Statecraft in a Shifting World: Growth, Sanctions, and Global Markets. Thank you, everyone.
Please welcome Merritt Janow, Ed Knight, Wally Adiamo, and Jack Liu.
Well, good evening, everyone. How wonderful to
see all of you, so many friends, alumni. You know, Washington is the second largest community of our alumni, and so it's a particular pleasure to see all of you. And, you know, about a third of our graduates specialize in economics and finance and economic development. So it's a particular privilege for me to moderate this conversation with three extraordinary individuals. You have their bios, but let me say that Secretary Liu joined us coming out of Treasury, and of course he's had a great career in OMB and other parts, and most recently as ambassador in Israel, but we're very grateful he has returned to Columbia and SIPA, where he's been a very generous colleague and a remarkable faculty member. So thank you, Jack, for joining us again. And, you know, tonight we'll also hear from Wally Ademoyo, who's been Deputy Secretary of the Treasury, and in that role has just been the point person on so many challenging matters in international finance and economic policy. And Ed Knight as Vice Chairman of NASDAQ, and previously as head of General Counsel and Public Policy and General Counsel of Treasury. So I can't imagine a more insightful set of leaders to speak to us, both about economic trends, but also about policy. And I wonder if we might start by talking about the economic condition of the world before talking about policy in the areas you're each so close to. And I suppose my first question is really to ask you how you think the condition of the US economy and the global economy sits today. When I travel the world, I hear a tremendous envy, if you will, about the vitality of the US economy, of the performance of the US economy. And of course, the IMF has been increasing expectations for US performance and decreasing expectations for most other advanced economies. But Americans are not feeling good about the state of the US economy for the most part. Although business leaders seem to be quite positive at the moment. So we're filled with these uncertainties and contradictions. So before turning to policy, I wonder if I might invite you to offer some perspectives on how you see the state of the US and the global economy. Let me start with you, Wally, since you've been the closest to having to make those views known to the world.
Well, thank you so much, and it's so great to be a part of the SIPA community, partially because it seems like it's a Treasury Alumni Association. So it's great to be here. And my wife also thanks you because you're the first group that will listen to me other than her since I left office. So I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you, but I think what you say is true. When I was in office, I would often say to my counterparts that I'd rather have my job than yours any day because the US economy was doing so well, and it continues to do well. Structurally, we're in a better position than our competitors. Think about the fact that the economy continues to grow above trend. You have historically low unemployment. Inflation is heading back towards 2%. And the increased amount of foreign direct investment in the United States means that over time, we're going to increase the amount of things that we can build here in the United States. The US economy, when you compare it to Europe or China, is doing quite well. But the rub is that it's doing very well for those people who own assets and not so well for those who don't. So if you make under $100,000 in this country and you don't own a home or you don't own financial assets, you have not participated in the buildup in wealth in the same way that those who are on the other side of this do. And that is where the crux, I think, of the debate in this country is happening in terms of while the economy is doing well at the macro, when you disaggregate that data, working class Americans do not feel like they're doing well. The impact of inflation, the high cost of buying housing, the lack of growth in terms of their overarching wealth has driven a great deal of the discontent that we're seeing today and has put us in a place where a number of them say that the institutions that have been built either domestically but around the world are not working for me. And in large part, that's what policy on both sides of the aisle have been trying to respond to. So I'll leave it there because I often don't get to speak before Jack does, so I'll leave the rest to him.
Jack, I invite you to address the same question. And, you and I have traveled together to other parts of the world, China, Asia. How are you seeing global trends?
So, Merritt, first, it's great to be back, and I do feel like it's coming home. And my view of the kind of U.S. versus the other economies of the world is very much, not surprisingly, like Wally's. I would much rather have the U.S. Current economic conditions and forecast conditions. At the same time, I think underneath the surface, there are weaknesses. We came out of COVID, I think, with policies that helped America grow faster than other countries did, but with a tail of inflation that was very significant. It was not just the United States, it was around the world as well. But we have gone through a period over the last 8 years where there's reasons to worry about, even if we get inflation down to 2%, whether it's going to stay in a controlled place, whether people can expect their real wages to grow. And as Wally said, they don't see the benefit even now after this period of very substantial growth in their paycheck. I think the challenge is going to get worse, not better, because all the policies that we're hearing discussed are things that are going to drive inflation, not tamp down inflation. And I think inflation at its core is not just an economic problem, it's a huge political problem. It doesn't make sense rationally in a way, because if you gave me the choice of 1 million people losing their jobs, or everyone seeing a fraction of a % erosion of their purchasing power, I would tell you the human cost of 1 million people losing their jobs is much more serious. As a political matter, having that fraction of a percentage erosion of your purchasing power hollows out your political capital. I think in some ways that's one of the places we are right now, with an economy that by the macro aggregate measures is very strong, but people feel like it didn't work for them, even though real wages went up coming out of COVID. So it's not even that real wages didn't come up. I think you go around the world, they're still struggling to get growth back. The inflation problem has not been licked in other countries. So I think the challenge is partially political and it's partially economic. I think if we had met at the end of the the Obama administration, I would have said a lot of the things that Wally said coming out of the Biden administration, that we had an economy that performed really well coming out of then the financial crisis, but real people weren't feeling it. And that has consequences. European growth is slow. You're also seeing populist, right-wing populist responses to that in Europe. So the line between politics and economics is a very thin one.
Well, thank you. Ed, you are very close to the markets, and there's a high degree of business confidence now, at least in the U.S., and U.S. firms are really dominating the capital markets. I saw some data the other day that was saying that the world index, U.S. firms are 70% of the world index. So how do you think about, this shift in the world and indeed the resilience of markets? How are you perceiving business confidence linked to the real economy?
Well, first let me say, Merritt, thank you for your leadership at SIPA, NASDAQ's involvement, my involvement. It's because of you. We really appreciate how you've exposed us to all the good work of this great school. And Wally and Jack, your most recent public service, thank you for it. You had difficult assignments at difficult times, and the country benefits from that greatly. So the picture that we see at NASDAQ in terms of the capital markets is very positive. I've been with NASDAQ for many years, and I've never seen a time where there is more interest, not just of U.S. companies wanting to go public, but foreign companies wanting to get access to the U.S. capital markets. We feel like we're kind of a national champion for the U.S. economy and for the United States, and people are open to it at this moment. You might ask why. Why are we, in comparison to so many other economies, enjoy such a strong public capital market? It's several things. One, our culture is very unique. We are a risk-taking culture, if you will. We are an equity culture. Other countries don't have that. Two is, and I can't emphasize this enough, and I believe we're all lawyers up here, and I'm guilty of that, but the legal system in the United States, the rule of law, our market would not exist without that foundation. People who invest here respect our laws. They know our courts are independent. They have some fear and trepidation of the SEC, which I don't think is a bad thing. And these institutions serve us very well. They are the key foundation of markets like NASDAQ. Third, and for this audience, it's so important, and it's often underlooked, and one of our former Treasury Secretaries, Larry Summers, used to always point it out, that innovation and growth in this country isn't the whole country, unfortunately. It happens to be in states where the great research-based universities are located, like Columbia. You see it in Boston, you see it in New York City, you see it in Austin and San Francisco. It's the synergies, the spin-offs that come from that research, from that study, it's very unique. And it's not found everywhere else in the world. And lastly, technology is a key issue too, because it makes our market safe. Not only can you trade fast, but we can find bad guys fast, and it distributes information widely. So the sum result of it is, I like one statistic to show how strong our economy is. So foreign direct investment from just one country into the United States, South Korea last year, was $75 billion. That's the total amount of foreign direct investment in India last year. The world is rushing to invest here. Will it always be that way? I don't know. We cannot take it for granted. The public markets are growing, yes, but the private markets are growing even faster, and they don't protect you as well. So we need to show some attention to the public markets. But they have served us well, and it is the result of not NASDAQ. It's the result of a lot of work by this country, by policymakers, by universities over the last 100 years, and it's a product of our culture.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you, Ed, for being on our advisory board and part of our community. If I could, I'd like to shift us now to talk a little bit about economic statecraft, because the world has changed so much. And I think of the changes that have really come since the great financial crisis you alluded to, and those changes have been structural as a result of technology and the environment. They've been policy-driven. And in recent years, I think of industrial policies in the US and around the world, this sense of economic security, the drive for resilience, how that's translated into policies aimed at nearshoring, homeshoring, friendshoring, and the major geopolitical realignments as a result of tensions between the US and China, the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and so much more. So these three dimensions have come to change our world very dramatically and have caused multiple administrations to use new tools to deal with this uncertainty and complexity. And so I guess, Jack, I'm reminded you wrote a piece in 2018 in Foreign Affairs saying on the use and abuse of economic statecraft, in which you said the U.S. has come to rely on economic tools to advance its foreign policy goals, and this is only more so in recent years. So I'd like maybe to have a shift and talk about these shifts. And maybe if I could start with you again, Wally, although you've deferred to Jack, I think you've been in the hot seat and really been thinking through what economic security means today and how that's evolved in recent years. Could you share your thinking on because it's continuing to influence, I think, profoundly our world.
I think you said foreign policy, and I think the key difference, and I think it's been an evolution, is that many of these tools were thought of as tools for national security. And we tried as a country to draw a stark line between the things we would do to secure our national security and things we would do to secure our economic security. In lots of ways, that line no longer exists. We're willing to use these tools. For example, IEPA, which is a tool that hopefully many of you never have heard of, is now being used not just to advance sanctions, but also to advance tariffs. And what this does is that when the United States doing it, it provides us with using the power of our economy to try and accomplish our goals, which is an important thing for us, but it also means other countries will do the same. We did this in some ways when it came to using them for things like outbound investment screening or data security protection using IEPA. So new ways of using this tool, and the new administration is doing that as well. But the question really becomes for us, how do we draw lines around how we will use this going forward? And that's shifting today, and I think as that shifts, we're going to see the world also shift alongside it and see other countries think about how they use their tools in a way that will, to Ed's point, lead to a degree of uncertainty for investors until the lines are redrawn about how these tools will be used going forward.
Thank you. That opens the door to the question about financial sanctions themselves. And Jack, you were really, I think, the architect of a contemporaneous, or more contemporary redesign of the sanctions regime, and thinking, how effective do you think those instruments are in advancing U.S. objectives?
So, Merritt, I think they're hugely important tools, and one of the reasons that I self-consciously addressed it in a doctrinal way while I was at Treasury and then followed up writing about it while I was teaching at SIPA was that we have a real risk that these very important tools get dull if you use them too much. They all depend on the centrality of the U.S. economy to the global economy. They all depend on access to the U.S. market being something that's more highly valued than other sovereign decisions that would be made, that access to the U.S. dollar is valued more than some other domestic concern. In the area of sanctions, what you're fundamentally trying to do is use an economic tool to have a sovereign change its policies because it's important enough. If we were to get to the point where they're overused, so we use it with our friends as much as our enemies, we use it when it's an economic issue that in no way affects any common sense definition of national security, it raises the question of, can you rely on the stability of doing business in U.S. dollars and in the U.S.? I don't think we're anywhere near close to the point of losing the fundamental centrality that is so important to the U.S. economy. I think what Ed was saying about U.S. ability to attract capital is proof that even after quite a few years of much more aggressive use of sanctions, we still have that very desirable position. One of the things that I argued when I was at Treasury was we shouldn't use them when we don't think they're going to have real effect, when they're really symbolic and not for the purpose of achieving a change. I think we've gotten to a point where that question can be asked, have we overdone that? I think in some cases, even in the administration I served in, that question can be asked. I think the things that I'm hearing about now, even more so. I think the caution has to be not, is it today or tomorrow, but over the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, is that rule of law that Ed was talking about going to be something people count on? So I would reserve sanctions for things that are really high priorities, where they can be effective, and in general, we've only seen sanctions be truly effective in a few very special cases. In the case of Iran, partially in the case of Russia, and South Africa was a different regime. So there aren't that many examples of sanctions truly getting sovereigns to change their policy, which is a reason to be more cautious in how you use them, because you could weaken the tool without getting a lot of benefit.
Thank you. Ed, you interact with businesses operating around the world that have to navigate not just the U.S. Sanctions and restrictions, but layers of sanctions and restrictions by many countries, some in tension with each other. How do you perceive business leaders responding to the uncertainty associated with these geopolitical realignments and the approaches to economic security and sanctions? How do you see business responding to this changing world?
I think over time it's changed. A few years ago, there was a lot of frustration. I think if there's any good news, it is that the complexity of the geopolitical picture in the world and the macroeconomic picture, boards increasingly want this explained to them. And so to SIPA graduates, students out there, there is increased demand for people who can make sense of the world and of how economic sanctions are necessary to deal with geopolitical issues, because the alternative often is boots on the ground, and presidents naturally don't want to turn to that alternative until they've looked at other alternatives. But it is a complex world. The busiest lawyers in Washington deal with economic sanctions. But from the corporate perspective, I've had the privilege of talking to a number of boards. Last week, I spoke to the board of an Israeli company listed on NASDAQ. It's the first time I had to say the word SIPA to them, And this is going on around the world now. And they need your graduates to talk to them about it and explain it to them. But the world is also reacting to this uncertainty that they see in the U.S. and trying to get their house in order in the UK, in the EU. India is looking again at what it can do to attract more investment. So the whole world is responding to this uncertainty that is in part a product of a very complicated geopolitical world.
Well, thank you. I feel we shouldn't leave this conversation without talking at least a little bit about tariffs. And of course, there's so much to say. I mean, there are parts of the world in Southeast Asia that are still trying to integrate more deeply and doing so through formal and informal, mechanisms. But generally, the appetite for creating global frameworks is, I think, the lowest it's been in my lifetime, and we have this increasing approach in the United States and elsewhere, not just the U.S., but particularly the U.S., that's very reciprocity-oriented, and, seeing trade in more zero-sum terms when it was not traditionally viewed that way. And I wonder if each of you might comment on what you see as the opportunities and the risks of using tariffs this way, because tariffs have been an instrument of revenue, and they've been an instrument of protection, and they've been an instrument of reciprocity. And we're seeing all of that at once now, I think, and I wonder if each of you have a perspective on it. Jack, would you like to start?
I think we've seen an evolution in how tariffs are thought of, from being a response to economic harm done to us to being a more generic tool. As Wally was saying, the line between the economic and the geopolitical tools have kind of mixed. So when you see tariffs threatened because you want Mexico and Canada to limit the amount of fentanyl coming into the United States, I mean, I've been to China many times and made arguments we are going to do things that are very tough if you don't limit fentanyl. The idea of that being a tariff policy to your two closest trading partners in the Western Hemisphere is a kind of a different way of thinking about tariffs. From the beginning of the United States, tariffs were a revenue source. It's not like tariffs are evil, but they have not been used in that kind of punitive way traditionally. If that becomes a norm, then we get to a world where the tit for tat begins, and the global trading system can't survive a lot of that. You know, the history of the mid-20th century was not a happy history, early 20th century, because of tariff wars. People think talking about Smoot-Hawley is just history, but it's kind of human nature and economics. So I'm a little worried that we're just thinking now about tariffs in a different way. Yes, it's right to remedy unfair trading practices. Yes, it's right to have equalized trading relationships around the world. But if tariffs become a broadly used political tool, I don't know where the limit on that is. And that's not a place where we have unilateral power. There is reciprocity.
Thank you. Molly?
I do think the question we have to ask ourselves is the why. And I think it comes back to what I said about the economy, which is that working class Americans feel as if the system that was built is not working for them. So the question then becomes, what do you do about it? And I think for some, the idea is you reform the system, and for others, it's you, in some ways, go around the system and don't work within it. And I think that gets to the use of tariffs. And one thing to follow up on Jack's point about sanctions that I think relates to tariffs is one of the things we tried to do very hard, especially in the Russia-Ukraine context, was build an international coalition to go alongside us when we use sanctions. Part of the reason for that was because Russia was far more exposed to Europe's economy, but the other reason for that was it was part of protecting the dollar, because if Russia wanted to try and escape, or any other country wanted to escape from using the dollar, where were they gonna go? You can only buy things in China with RMB. If you want to go to any of the world's convertible currencies, be it the pound sterling, the euro, or the yen, they're part of our coalition. Ultimately, the challenge with a tariff policy that is the US going alone is that you all of a sudden put yourself in a position where other countries start to think about what they can do without the United States. And I'm not concerned about the dollar's viability when it comes to the BRICS or some other coalition. But when our closest allies and partners, the other countries with convertible currencies, see that we're using these tools against them, and they start to think about doing things without the United States, that's when I become concerned. And to your point, while we're not looking to do international trade deals, in the last several months, the European Union has signed 3 trade deals. And my sense is that the thing I'm afraid of is that if we are using a tariff policy first, that the rest of the world will think about how they do deals without the United States, which I think over the long term will not be to our benefit.
Thank you. Ed?
My recollection is all Treasury departments, regardless of the administration, have always believed in transparency, certainty, telegraphing to the markets your policies, being very predictable, frankly, very honest about performance, delivering bad news. The tariff picture makes this all very uncertain and hard for the investing public, for the rest of the world, to understand where we're going. And that uncertainty, I fear, will cause our trading partners to pull away from us because they don't have the ability to understand where we're going. So I pray for certainty, predictability, and transparency in what we're doing here.
I think that's why we built a global trading system for a predictability and transparency and certainty. Who said this was the dismal science, economics, huh? So please join me in thanking our wonderful colleagues.
Please welcome to the stage Maria Ressa.
I'm going to try to keep it short so that we can eat. No. Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you all for being here. While we're in the atrium, when I heard we were at the National Portrait Gallery, I was really excited because this used to be the patent. This building used to be the patent office. And, you know, I thought, okay, innovation, how does that fit in? And then the National Portrait Gallery, it commemorates those who shaped this nation's history. And, you know, then I began to merge it with it, well, like in the Philippines right now, I think Americans are actually seeing today how quickly history can change in plain sight, which makes everything we say and do even more important today. Karen mentioned that we're living through this profound transformation of our world. The last time something like this happened, when new technology enabled the rise of fascism, was 80 years ago. Well, that was roughly around the last time a journalist was named for a Nobel Peace Prize, except that guy, Karl von Ossietzky, couldn't accept it because he was languishing in a Nazi jail. For many years now, I've sounded the alarm. Like in Hiroshima, an atom bomb exploded in our information ecosystem. In pursuit of power and money, technology enabled insidious manipulation at the cellular level of our democracy, of us, the voters, micro-targeting fear, anger, hate, seeding meta-narratives that destroyed trust. It created what the US Surgeon General called this epidemic of loneliness. Hillary wrote a piece about that, turning neighbor against neighbor and rewarding mob rule, rewarding the worst of who we are as people. Journalists were the first attacked. If you want power, tear down our credibility. This is something I know firsthand because my government in the Philippines targeted me with an average of 90 hate messages per hour. Acted like fertilizer, #arrest Maria Ressa trended on social media 2 years before I was actually arrested. What seems impossible with repetition becomes possible. I was arrested and first posted bail on Valentine's Day in 2019. I can't forget that. In a little over a year, my government filed 10 arrest warrants against me with a cumulative maximum prison sentence of 103 years. I didn't know what was going to happen, but Rappler, the company I co-founded, and we did what was right. And now, nearly a decade later, those 10 criminal charges are down to 2. But to be here in front of you, to be part of SIPA, I've lost some freedom because I constantly have to ask the Philippine Supreme Court for approval to travel. The sad part, it's now happening faster in other parts of the world, including right here. Big tech transformed social media from a tool of connection into a weapon of mass behavioral engineering. These platforms are not neutral technologies. They're sophisticated systems designed to exploit our deepest psychological vulnerabilities. They monetize our outrage and hate, amplify our divisions, and systematically erode our capacity for nuanced thinking and empathy. In 2018, an MIT study showed that lies spread 6 times faster on social media. That was before Elon Musk bought Twitter. You tell a lie 1,000,000 times, it becomes a fact. If you make people believe lies are facts, then you can control them. And the 3 sentences that I say over and over since 2016, without facts, you can't have truth. Without truth, you can't have trust. Without these 3, we don't have a shared reality. We can't solve existential problems like climate change, We can't have journalism. We can't have democracy. So why is our experience in the Philippines important? Well, let me give you our history in one sentence. The Philippines spent 300 years in a convent and 50 years in Hollywood. 300 years under Spanish colonial rule, 50 years under America. Our Constitution is patterned after the United States with the checks and balances of 3 branches of government. The Cambridge Analytica whistleblower, Chris Wiley, told me that CA tested tactics of mass manipulation in the Philippines, and if those tactics worked, they ported them over here to you. In 2016, Russian propaganda touched 126 million Americans. So even before COVID, I thought of this like a virus, the virus of lies that spreads and infects until the entire system is completely transformed when it hits a tipping point. We're near a tipping point. Exploiting the design of social media, this is how we now live in alternative realities. Some lessons from what we lived through in the Philippines, and that data is all in my book, How to Stand Up to a Dictator. 1, you have to draw the line of your values. Karen brought that up. That's what SIPA helps teach. 2, you have to hold the line. Hashtag hold the line was our rallying cry, and we didn't get shut down. We're still here, and I'm still not in jail. So do not voluntarily give up your rights. And 3, protect the facts. And you do that through radical collaboration. Collaborate, 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 which is exactly what we've done at the Institute of Global Politics, creating a partnership between governments, academia, and the industry. Much as I beat up big tech for good reason, based on data, we also work closely with them. We set out to solve a clear problem, not free speech, but safety. In July 2023, France's President Emmanuel Macron appointed 3 French women, 2 Frenchmen, and 1 Filipina to do a nationwide consultation which created the partnership of Sciences Po and SIPA, because 2 of us, that's Camille Francois and I, are professors of practice at SIPA, and we lead the innovation lab at IGP. A year ago, we incubated a trust and safety tools consortium, which tapped some of the best minds working in the tech industry and gave them a safe space for collaboration. I joke that this was like forming Alcoholics Anonymous for trust and safety teams, because those folks are often at the bottom of the totem pole in their companies. But they all share the same goal, to keep all of us safe online. We produced 2 papers just a few hours ago in Paris. The French government at the AI Action Summit and Camille Francois launched Roost, Robust Open Online Safety Tools, which has backing from philanthropies and major tech companies, donors like Discord, OpenAI, and Google, to ensure that a broad set of stakeholders have a vested interest in its success. Roost is building, open sourcing, and maintaining modular building blocks for AI safety, and offering hands-on technical support by experts to enable organizations of all sizes, from startups to big tech companies, to build and use AI responsibly. That includes tackling some of the biggest safety challenges, like eliminating child sexual abuse material, or CSAM, from AI data sets and models. This is a community effort to build scalable and resilient safety infrastructure for the AI era, and it began and was incubated in SIPA. Now it's an engineering NGO. In about a year, we created a baseline, the floor for online safety that anyone building tech can use. That's important for me in Rappler because a few years ago, We stopped waiting for big tech's empty promises about our public information ecosystem. We began to build our own public tech stack, a decentralized, secure chat app on the Matrix protocol. Everyone on different protocols can benefit from Roost globally. That protocol, the Matrix protocol, is used by countries which value data privacy like France, Germany, Taiwan. You can download the Rappler Communities app and see how real people can have real conversations in a shared reality free from manipulation. We're now building a global federation of news organizations on the Matrix protocol. It is how we will survive this present moment of the past. Many of you have heard me use that T.S. Eliot quote all the time, that the latest novel you read is affected by the fact that you read Shakespeare, but your understanding of Shakespeare will be shaped by the latest novel you read. The idea here is that our history, our understanding of history is shaped by what each of us will do today. A decade from now, when we look back at this moment, we want to say that we did everything we could to build the world we want. Oh, and about the Philippines today. We've moved from hell to purgatory. So, it can get better. But it all depends on what you do today, on what SIPA teaches our students today, on what our students take and shape the world. Draw the line, hold the line, and collaborate, collaborate, collaborate. Thank you.
Please join us in welcoming Moselle Thompson, the representative for the International Fellows Program, tonight's presenting sponsor.
Good evening. Well, I wanted to say good evening to Interim President Armstrong and Dean Yari Milo, honored guests and SIPA alumni. Also, welcome to all of our friends and colleagues here in Washington, D.C. I'm delighted to participate in this evening's program that recognizes the important connection between the cutting-edge, world-class policy education that's offered at Columbia SIPA and the important work that's being done here in Washington. Tonight, I'm especially honored to represent the alumni and students from the SIPA International Fellows Program. The IFP is a program that's unique in higher education. Each year, the program selects a group of talented scholars from across disciplines across Columbia University and engages them in a year of policy exercises designed to introduce them to the complex public policy world of problem solving. Remember that? Problem solving. Like the world that you're hearing about tonight. Now, for many of us, the IFP was not only an opportunity to consider big issues, but it was a chance to examine them from a variety of perspectives beyond borders of our experience at our respective schools. Now, for me, I am sure that I speak for all of alumni when I say that the lessons we learned introduce us to a variety of disciplines and gave us tools we use throughout our careers. The IFP enabled me to think beyond my purely legal training, enabled me to be more effective in my work at the Treasury Department and the Federal Trade Commission. IFP alumni are here tonight. I see you. And we are also excited to welcome the IFP's new director, Toria Newland. We are happy to support and celebrate SIPA as it trains the next generation of policy leaders. And now I'm just going to take a point of personal privilege. What makes me feel so good tonight is to see all of you out there, because you represent the next generation of problem solvers. You are among the best and brightest. So don't be afraid of the hard challenges. I am sure you're ready to meet them, and I feel good about seeing you. Congratulations.
Welcome to the stage, Michael Nutter.
Good evening. That was some of the weakest applause I've ever received in my entire political career. So, I'm sorry, wrong crowd. I guess probably not doing the Eagles chant tonight. Dean Karen, thank you for the opportunity to speak to this incredible assemblage tonight. Part of the reason I was asked to speak, I'm the 98th mayor of the city of Philadelphia. We had a pretty good night last night. But the other reason I was asked is that, mayors on the ground are used to wrangling unruly crowds. And so I was asked to bring everyone back from your running around to tables and visiting and seeing and talking to all of your friends, because, we have like a serious program, and we'd like you to come back to your seats. In a much more serious way, can we please recognize all of our panelists who were up here earlier this evening, all of the speakers. As a recovering elected official, we have to, recognize everyone who has gone before us and the folks who will come after. So this portion will actually take about a half hour as I go through. No, I'm not going to do that. But you see the incredible array, and you will continue to see the incredible array of talent here at SIPA. And I think while we know it, sometimes we might actually take it for granted. And so whether it's Dean Karen or Secretary Clinton, 3 former deans, Dean Lisa, Dean Merritt, Dean Tom, incredible alums, Claire Shipman, Jack Lew is back, Jack is back, and while he's on his way, we are tremendously fortunate, and so I would say a little bit of a sports analogy. Game recognizes game. I came to SIPA because I wanted to be with the best, and I wanted to challenge myself each and every day, whether it's our students, whether it's an incredible array of professors and faculty and staff and all the people who work here, that if you want to be the best, then you want to be around the best. You want to learn from the best. You want to argue with the best. You want to talk with the best to up your level of service. And so, of course, we're known internationally. It's this incredible public policy school, but we also are very well rooted in domestic policy. For all the things that happen internationally, of course, they trickle down, not in a economic way, but the reality is they happen on the ground. They take place mostly in cities. Our students will often go into local, county, and state government, and of course the federal government as well. And I encourage them, notwithstanding whatever your politics may be, I would rather have any SIPA student in our federal government right now sitting at a table trying to make something happen or stop something bad from happening in this country. And that's what they are taught, that's what they are built for. I would not forgive myself being here if I didn't mention a particular SIPA student. Class of 17, Annie Pope. Annie Pope was my first teaching assistant. If anything has gone haywire, it is not Annie's fault. She tried her best when I first came to SIPA in 2016, right out of the city government in Philadelphia. And she is here tonight, and I just want to thank her for putting up with me and helping to show me the ropes. Annie, thank you so very much. I came to SIPA initially while I was still in office to come to the forums that Mayor David N. Dinkins had put together in that incredible speaker series, and to work with Esther Fuchs and the work that she's doing, of course, at SIPA Global Cities Project. We are very well grounded in the local. And so I want to encourage all of us, and again, especially our students, to make that connection between international activities and what takes place on the ground in cities, not only across the United States of America, but truly across the world. Which then leads us to our upcoming panel. Some of you, of course, are naturally incredible experienced leaders and thinkers of the world today. And you know that many of our most pressing global challenges begin and are often exacerbated at the local level. And I urge all of us to think about that connection between the global and the local, and whether in your professional life and certainly every day as well. Which brings me to the opportunity to introduce our next panel, The World Today, Navigating Complex Global Challenges. Please recognize and welcome our next folks coming to the stage. And thank you for the opportunity to be with you on this incredible night. Thank you, SIPA.
Please welcome to the stage Hillary Rodham Clinton, Mauricio Cardenas, Lisa Anderson, Thomas Christensen, and Victoria Newland.
Thank you very much. This is a big subject, and we don't have very much time, so let's get right to it. We're joined by Lisa Anderson, Professor Emerita of the International Relations, Dean Emerita of SIPA, also President of the American University in Cairo from 2011 through 2016 during the Arab Spring protests. Mauricio Cardenas, Professor of Professional Practice and Global Leadership in the Faculty of International and Public Affairs, Director of the MPA in Global Leadership, formerly, among other things, Finance Minister of Colombia. Tom Christensen, Professor at SIPA, Director of Colombia's China and the World Program. He served as a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs, with responsibility for relations with China, Taiwan, and Mongolia. And Victoria Newland, the Shelby Cullom Davis Professor in the Practice of International Diplomacy and the Director of the International Fellows Program at SIPA. A career ambassador, she previously served as Acting Deputy Secretary of State and as Undersecretary for Political Affairs. So we have a very short period of time to at least try to hit some of the challenges in the geopolitical arena. And so, Toria, let me start with you, because I think it's interesting to ask what it's like now to teach and try to make sense of the world with your students. How do you draw out the contradictions of what we see going on with the new administration and some of the real norm breaking that is taking place?
Well, first of all, let me just say how thrilled I am to be at SIPA and to be running the International Fellows Program with the best students at SIPA, some of whom are here today. You know, I think before the new administration came into office, we were already in the classroom understanding what an intense period this is with a hot war in Ukraine, with a hot war and now a ceasefire in Gaza, with China competing aggressively and coercing others. But now the question of who the United States is going to be in that world is front and center in the classroom, because we have, in our first semester, taught that 80-year U.S. personality of, yes, strong global leadership, sometimes aggressive global leadership, but also great global generosity and alliance building. And now we have a different approach. And we need, as we always do in the classroom, to be open to new ideas, to think about whether that 80 years of doing things one way might not need some adapting. But at the same time, we also have folks in the classroom whose jobs are on the line. You know, I have students who've been invited to the State Department in AID who don't know whether they will be working. We have military officers who are going to be asked to do different things. We have folks from the business school who grew up thinking tariffs were, as the first panel discussed, not a great idea, and now they're going to be central to what we do economically. So it's a big adjustment, but it's important that we continue to explore these things together, and we do it with our international students as well as our Americans.
So, Lisa, let's shift to the Middle East for a moment. Obviously, we're seeing enormous change, upheaval in the region, and in addition to the realignments with Assad gone in Syria, Hezbollah weakened considerably, Hamas certainly weakened but not out, Iran on the back foot, ceasefire and hostage deal, and then a proposal to turn Gaza into a Dubai-like Riviera and expel its 2 million Palestinian inhabitants. It's very difficult to really understand and make sense of where we are. And I think that, you know, from your long experience, give us a quick summary overview. What is the future of Gaza? What is the future of any potential deal of normalization between Israel and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia? What does it mean if the president follows through on what he said today, which was to threaten to take away aid from Egypt and Jordan in order to press them to take 2 million residents of Gaza?
Okay, well, first of all, let me thank you, Secretary Clinton, and thank Karen and everyone for convening us all together. I want to say two things on a sort of more perhaps personal level before I address. I can't answer that question, but I can address it. First of all, I want to say to everyone associated with SIPA, I think what you do, what we do, is incredibly important. Public policy is important. International affairs is important. And we're at a moment where that's a particularly difficult case to make, perhaps, but one of the reasons why I think it was appropriate entirely to have this event here is to make that case and to say the kinds of work that SIPA has done for decades and decades is incredibly important. And it has been, on the second note, a very gratifying to see how many people who have been involved at SIPA in various relationships. Karen, you said there were MIAs and MPA graduates. Actually, they're a bunch of certificate graduates. I am one of them, and I am a proud alum. And so there are all various IFP people and so forth and so on. What we do is important, and what we do is going to, as it has historically, make an enormous difference. And so I just want to say I'm proud to be a part of this community. I always have been, and I have more optimism and confidence as a result of that association. I think the Middle East, and Secretary Clinton, you and I are among the relatively few people in this room who probably remember the '67 war. This is one of the most difficult periods in memory. This is a very, very complicated time. It's not clear, in my estimation, that any of the governments in the region and in the world, including our own, really are equipped to try and figure out what this should look like in the long run. We tend, for obvious reasons, to be focused on Gaza. The president is focused on Gaza. In many ways, we have been focused collectively on Gaza for almost a year and a half at this point. There's a new government in Syria. Iran is in a different position than it was before. There's actually a president in Lebanon. There are a lot of things that have changed that we haven't been paying as much attention to as we might. So I think, in some respects, there are opportunities here to think about the region in a different way. I'm not sure that the American government is at the leading edge of that. Clearly, as everyone has said, the proposals on Gaza that President Trump has offered to us are out of the box. I think out of the box need not be a euphemism for unusual and cruel, as they sometimes seem to be. But I do think the moment for new thinking and reconceptualizing what the region is going to look like is upon us, and appropriately so. So in the short run, I do not think the idea that residents of Gaza will be happily resettled in other places is a starter. I don't think that will happen. And I think the American president's threatening of Jordan and Egypt on that score is going to actually mobilize the Saudis against it. So I think we're going to see a challenge to the Abraham Accords as a result of this. That's not obviously what the president intends, but I think that's the short-term likely outcome, and then what happens after that, it's very hard to tell, as it always has been.
Thank you, Lisa. Well, let's talk, Mauricio, about Latin America, because there's a lot of moving parts in that region as well that you know. So we had the back and forth between our president and the president of Colombia over the handling of deportations, and it led to a diplomatic spat that took place over X, formerly known as Twitter. And of course, the outcome led to, you know, a worrisome set of challenges from the government of Colombia to this current administration. We had the talk about the Panama Canal, with the Secretary of State taking his very first trip to Panama, where the threats continued about what should be done with the canal. And we saw Panama back out of the China Belt and Road Initiative, which again led this administration to claim a certain accomplishment there. We've seen El Salvador offer to open its prisons to violent criminal deportees. We've seen the threat to remove temporary protective status to something like 350,000 Venezuelans, along with others, including Haitians, to be sent back. We've seen the opening of Guantanamo to be used as a either prison or way station. So as you look at the region and the kind of shock waves that are being felt there, what is your perspective on what we can expect going forward?
Well, thank you very much, Secretary Clinton. I'm delighted to be here. I direct SIPA's newest program, which is the MPA in Global Leadership, and I'm so happy to report that we already have a table of alumni that are here, only 2 cohorts, and they have landed in Washington, great jobs. So, I mean, this is a region you know so well. I think the audience will also be very interested in your views, but let me give you my views. President Petro from Colombia was absolutely right about complaining about the humanitarian condition in which the deportees were being sent to Colombia. I mean, handcuffed, with chains, treated like criminals. But he did it in a way that backfired because the reaction was overwhelming. In less than 12 hours, he had capitulated, essentially because the sanctions, the increase in tariffs, the suspension of visas, all of that, put the whole country during that Sunday in a situation where even his closest allies, his own members of the cabinet said, we'll have to fix this. So that served President Trump a great opportunity to show that force and send the signal to the rest of the world. So Colombia, at the end of the day, played that role. If you look at what has happened since then, on the surface, you could say American foreign policy has been successful. It went to Panama, Secretary Rubio, the Panamanians agree to change the terms of the contract with the Chinese company that runs the 2 ports on the canal. Leaving the Belt and Road Initiative was also something that was mentioned at that time. El Salvador receiving not just deportees, but also criminals, US citizens that are criminals in US jails. And I think the most important of all that is the decision by President Sheinbaum of Mexico to send 10,000 military to secure the northern border of Mexico. So you'd say, well, you know, we're succeeding. We're getting our neighbors in this region. This is what the US could say, do the right thing. But I have serious reservations about that. And I see 3 major risks coming up. So if you dig deeper, the whole strategy can backfire. First, if you stretch this rubber band too much, you may break it. And if you break it, say, for example, Mexico's trade represents 90% of its GDP. So I'd say the entire Mexican economy is trade. And of that, 90% is trade with the United States. So if you increase tariffs to Mexico, say by 50%, you're going to kill that economy. And if you kill the Mexican economy, there'll be more migrants coming to the United States. What about remittances? Remittances represent, in some countries in Central America, 30, 40, 50% of their GDPs. If you tax remittances, as has been mentioned here as an option in the United States, that is also going to reduce incomes in Central America, send more people northbound, send more people to the US. So the strategy can backfire in the sense that you have more migrants coming to the United States if the initial purpose was to keep people south of the border. Risk number 2, you can show force. You can show arrogance, but you cannot humiliate people. If you humiliate people, the damage that you cause lasts more than one American presidency. Take, for example, of 1903, when Colombia lost Panama. Colombia felt humiliated. It took more than 20 years to restore diplomatic relations with the United States because in Colombia it was politically toxic to talk about having a diplomatic relationship with the United States. So don't humiliate, especially your allies, your neighbors. Third risk, and I think this goes to the panel that we had before, and Merritt mentioned this very well, which is we live in a world where the US has always promoted the idea of rules in the sense of providing trust, confidence, transparency, security. If you change the rules because you don't like the free trade agreement you signed a few years ago, then you're not credible, and therefore you're not in a better position than other countries that you have always complained that are not rule-based. So that will put less interest on the part of countries to have a negotiation with the US, have a partnership with the United States, which are the elements that I think have been essential and central to the relationship between the US and Latin America. I can tell you this, I think there are more calls being made now from Latin America to China than before. And I think ultimately this means that in the medium to long term, the whole strategy can backfire because you are undermining the essence of an agreement with the United States, which is its stability. So I think if we look at the surface today, we say, oh, American show of force is being very successful. But I think it's just a matter of time. If you take a more long-term perspective, I think you can have a very different conclusion.
Well, you mentioned China, and let me turn now to Tom. This is right up your alley, Tom. You have written about the importance of allies and partners in the strategic competition with China and how important it is to engage China from a position of strength for deterrence, for negotiation purposes, surrounded by allies and partners with whom you are aligned. So how do you see the last 2 weeks, it's hard to believe now, I guess maybe 3 weeks, impacting the thinking in Beijing? And are we in a stronger or less strong position to deter China from, for example, trying to settle territorial disputes by force?
Thanks a lot, Secretary Clinton. Before I give you an answer, I am obliged, because I have a formal State Department role as an advisor, to say that, well, the opinions I give tonight are my own and do not necessarily represent those of the U.S. government. Okay, that's out of the way. So allies and partners are extremely important in the strategic competition to China. This has been recognized by administration after administration, and the Trump administration in the last couple of weeks seems to represent the same view, in that Secretary Rubio very early on met with the Quad allies and partners in Japan, Australia, and India. And we had the summit with Prime Minister Ishiba. This is very consistent with the U.S. strategy towards China, because you want to approach China from a position of strength. What concerns me about the alliance strategy is that it gets caught up in some of the things that we talked about in the earlier panel, and that is that most of our allies and partners around the world our closest allies and partners have trade surpluses with the United States. And if trade surpluses with the United States becomes a cause for raising tariffs against those actors, it complicates things greatly. So I look at East Asia, where our alliances are in a very good shape. The last several years, we've built them up, and there are new relationships that weren't really there before. And the one that sticks in my mind is the United States, Japan, and Korea sitting down together. We've wanted to do this for a long time, as you know. We tried and tried and tried, and we didn't get there. We finally got there, and it's very controversial in Korea. The president who did this, President Yoon, took some real risks. Now, we all know he's been in some real trouble at home, and there could be big changes in South Korea. In that environment, you want to solidify that triangular relationship. And the danger is that Korea has trade surpluses with the United States. If we raise lots of tariffs against Korea directly, that could make that relationship with Japan look more toxic, make it harder to sustain. And I'll give you another example from the region, and that is Vietnam. I traveled to 11 countries last year. I was on academic leave for the calendar year. And I got to Vietnam, and Vietnam has a very big trade surplus with the United States, and it's growing. It's growing in large part because we put tariffs on China. So Chinese firms, but also American firms, Japanese firms, and Korean firms move their production to Vietnam. Vietnam is a security partner in the maritime realm. It's not an ally, security partner in the maritime realm. If we raise tariffs on Vietnam, I worry whether we can sustain that cooperation. But equally important, South Korea invested a lot in Vietnam for final production. A lot of people don't know this probably, but Samsung, the vast majority of Samsung phones are produced in Vietnam. So if we raise tariffs on Vietnam, we're not just hurting Vietnam, a potential partner, we're hurting Japan and we're hurting South Korea in particular, and everyone's very nervous about it. So I'm worried about that trade deficit logic getting in the way of the strategic competition being executed successfully. And I take heart in the administration saying we really need to strengthen our position in that competition, and I agree with it. But certain things we could do on the economic front could undercut that unintentionally. In terms of deterrence, Deterrence has two parts. I always teach my students, and some of them are out there. You have to have a credible threat of response, and you have to have a credible assurance that the response is conditional on the behavior of the actor. So in terms of credible response, we need to have a more distributed, stronger position in East Asia, more reliance on allies and partners for accesses because our fixed bases are too vulnerable to Chinese strike weapons. We also need to get our allies and partners to do more. In particular, Taiwan needs to do more for its own defense, both in terms of mobile forces that could stop an invasion, but also societal resilience for a blockade scenario if their economy is cut off. And accompanying that, and this is the important thing, accompanying that has to be an assurance to Beijing that with all these new forces and all these new capabilities in the region, the purpose of them is not to change the fundamental U.S. One China policy and to change our political relationship with Taiwan. And it's not to encourage Taiwan to take political steps in the direction of permanent independence, steps that would almost certainly lead to crisis, if not conflict. And you can't deter a conflict by causing one. So you have to mix those credible threats and assurances, and it's a delicate balance. And I'm hopeful that this administration will continue with the traditional One China policy and not divert from it, and at the same time strengthen our position in the region, to include getting more long-range weapons into the region for potential conflict, because if you have a shortage of those in peacetime, it signals weakness, and that's never a good idea.
Thank you so much, Tom. Well, we're going to end, Toria, by asking you in less than a minute to talk about the end game in Ukraine. 25 minutes to cover the world, but I think we can't leave without having you talk to that.
Well, thanks. Look, I think no matter how this ends, it's incredibly important that we not reward territorial aggression to the extent that that is possible, because it is not going to end there. President Trump does not want to go and ask the American people for more money for Ukraine. I understand that. We've been incredibly generous. But there is, as we say in our kitchen, plenty of money in the banana stand, starting with $270 billion of Putin's money that's sitting in European banks. So I don't think that this war, I don't think Putin comes to the table with anything like good faith if he doesn't think that we have both the means and the will to allow Ukraine to continue to defend herself such that it will drag out for Russia. So we have to get some leverage into this equation. Ukraine needs an end to this war. Russia needs to know that it was folly and bad for it. And Ukraine needs to come out of this as a democratic sovereign state that is further integrated into Europe. I still think that is possible, but only if we insist that we will support Ukraine until Putin comes to the table with a credible, just deal.
Well, join me in thanking our four panelists. We've got a snapshot of how lucky students are to be at SIPA with each of them. Thank you all.
Welcome to the stage, Claire Shipman, Jason Bordoff, and Paul DeBar. Esteemed guests, please take your seats.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this IGP Across the Aisle discussion. I'm Claire Shipman, co-chair of the Board of Columbia, and more importantly, a SIPA alum. And I'm so thrilled to see all of my fellow alums in the audience tonight. I want to quickly introduce our panelists because we have a little bit of a hard out tonight, and we have a lot to get through. I'm not going to read their whole bios, which you can find under the programs, but Paul DeBar, we are thrilled that you are here. He served in the first Trump administration as the Department of Energy's Undersecretary for Science. More importantly, he's been with us at Columbia, I think, right? He's been a non-resident fellow and a former distinguished visiting fellow at CGEP. Jason Bordoff is the founding director of CGEP, as well as a professor of professional practice at SIPA. He served in the Obama administration on climate and energy issues. He's also the co-founding dean of our Columbia Climate School. Thank you both, gentlemen, for being with us. Big picture, Paul, I want to start with you. You worked closely with this transition team shaping the Department of Energy priorities now, and we've heard a lot about just really the phrase energy dominance. That's very important to this administration, but what would you say that means in practice? It's more than just drill, baby, drill, right? It's a broader array of priorities.
Yeah, so, you know, the president talked a lot in his months of speeches, you know, hour after hour. And it's actually quite easy to see his energy policy if you scrape his speeches. There's about 12 or 13 points that come up over and over again. And, you know, the top two are the energy dominance. Unleashing American energy is a little bit more of a term that he's been using, and the energy inflation point. So those are the top two out of the 12 or so. But I think at the macro point, like what does unleashing American energy dominance mean, is that there's kind of four major policy points for energy that are brought up on a kind of a normal basis. Energy production or availability, energy prices, environmental impact, and national security. Those are the four that people kind of bring up on a regular basis. You know, the last administration did a very high focus on item 3. And even within environmental impact, I ran the largest environmental cleanup program in the United States by far as undersecretary. It's a narrow focus on carbon. There's plenty of other environmental topics besides carbon. And so the president's focus is, I want to focus on all four in a balanced way. We need to produce more energy. We need to have, you know, we need to bring down prices, environmental impact, and national security. And the last thing I would say on that is that he remembers during his first administration, the energy production went up significantly. We had energy deflation. Prices were dropping during that whole time frame. The U.S. did lead the world in reduction of emissions. You can argue whether it should have gone faster or not, but it was actually at the same rate as Obama and the same rate as Biden. So that's the facts. And the national security was much better in the Middle East and elsewhere as a result of that. So that's his mindset.
Jason, you can give us a slightly different viewpoint because you just were at Davos. How would you describe what world leaders, global CEOs are thinking about the executive orders they're seeing, policy signals coming from Washington, and also what they may be seeing as a shift in U.S. energy policy?
Thanks. Thanks, Claire, for being here, and just what a privilege it is to be in this room and celebrate SIPA and see so many friends here, including remarkable leaders in energy and the environment. I saw Jen Morris, who leads the Nature Conservancy here, a SIPA grad, and I'm on the trustee there in New York. And saw Dan Propp, who was my student and then my teaching assistant, and then worked for me after he graduated until he left to go work at the Energy Bureau at the U.S. Department of State, which was created by Secretary Hillary Clinton. So it's a big energy policy circle of life at SIPA, where we train people and then they go off to serve in those important policy positions. Look, what we heard overseas, not just in Switzerland in January, but generally, is a lot of uncertainty. And I think that's part of our job at a place like SIPA, or the Center on Global Energy Policy, is trying to be sources of sober-minded analysis to help people understand what's going on, what matters and what doesn't. So everyone's seeing headlines that we're unleashing dominance, that we're opening the offshore to drilling, we're unleashing LNG exports, we're pulling out of the Paris Agreement, and the questions are, what does it mean that U.S. oil production is going to surge, which is going to be determined by oil prices far more than whether you're allowed to drill off the coast of Virginia, even if one allows you to, or pulling out of Paris, which generates a lot of headlines. Probably doesn't matter, not that I would have done it, as much as the headlines suggest. I think that what's always fascinated me about energy, and how great is it that we can talk about, like, we have 3 panels, there's so much to talk about in the world, and one of them is on energy. How exciting is that? I couldn't figure out what I was interested in, and so I was interested in international economics and foreign policy and science and care about the environment. Energy just brings all of those together. You can't make good energy policy decisions without understanding the dimensions of these decisions on each of those. And so I think I was interviewing on my podcast, one of Paul's former colleagues, Frank Fannin, who led the Energy Bureau at the State Department that Secretary Clinton created in the Trump administration. And his point, and I think was right, which is that among all those sometimes competing policy priorities, for the Biden administration, climate was the North Star. And for this one, energy security and affordability will be the North Star. And sometimes that takes you to the same place, sometimes it doesn't. But the only comment I would make is that this is not unique to the Trump administration. So you talk to leaders in Europe who the first thing they want to talk about is energy affordability and competitiveness and Mario Draghi's report. You look at Mark Carney running in Canada, walking back support for a carbon tax, or European Union, which just said they were going to exempt most companies, European companies, from their carbon border adjustment, not to mention emerging and developing economies that struggle to have access to any energy at all. So there's a risk here, which is we forget about the importance of climate, which I hope we don't do. But there's an opportunity too, because I've been writing for years and believe that if we don't guarantee energy security and access and affordability, the first thing that's going to go is support for a stronger climate agenda. And we have to figure out how to solve all of these sometimes competing policy priorities simultaneously. And this might be a moment of reset that allows us to focus on all the goals of energy policy and try to make progress on all of them.
Well, Paul, taking Jason's point that many other countries may be looking at things in a similar way. How do you think though about this administration's focus on energy, a change in policy, and international dynamics? What are the implications, for example, with our competitive relationship with China and for our friends, Canada and Mexico? And let me just throw tariffs, which we've heard a lot about tonight, on top of that. How do you think all of that is going to affect how will our energy policy affect those relationships, and then how does all of that work together?
So I wrote a paper about this at Hoover and stepped through the implications of American leadership on energy, how that changed, why that changed, and the impact of that on the global diplomacy. So the energy posture of the United States is radically different than where it was 8 years ago. The U.S. is now the #1 producer of natural gas in the world. It's the #1 exporter of natural gas in the world. It's the #1 producer of crude oil in the world. Let's absorb that. I think most people in this town don't realize this kind of basic facts. And the U.S. is the #3 exporter of crude in the world. It is also by far the biggest developer of new energy technologies. And as was mentioned by the gentleman from NASDAQ, we dominate the world in capital raising. We just completely swamp the world. And so America's leadership in energy creates a very different diplomatic space than 8 years ago. And that strength can be used in a very positive way. So I'll give you an example, which gives more flexibility. It's a very narrow point. It's a very diplomatic point. When President Trump decided to move the embassy to Jerusalem in his last administration, they sat around the Situation Room and debated the reaction in the Middle East of the U.S. moving the embassy to Jerusalem. And they were going around the table and talking about things. And my boss, the energy secretary, raised his hand and said, you know what, one thing we're not talking about is OPEC putting 1973 style embargo on us because we're supporting Israel, because we now are the largest energy producer in the world. So, and one last other thing, I wrote about this in the Wall Street Journal, which is in 2020, OPEC invited us to join OPEC. Just absorb that. We were asked to join OPEC Plus to be part of the cartel because of our leadership in oil production. We said no. It was a very entertaining series of phone calls that we got from various countries.
Before OPEC, the cartel was us. It was the Texas
we
Railroad Commission.
were the OPEC before '73. So our impact in the world is just really very, very different. How we can interact, given the physical technology production footprint change.
Do you think that, I mean, specifically on tariffs, too early to tell what impact that will have, either of you? Jason?
Well, I mean, we can, I think it's too early to tell because it's a little hard to tell how much of these are threats to extract concessions, how much will go into effect. But I think the thing I would say is it's all in a continued acceleration of a trend that had been underway for a while, which was a trend of geoeconomic fragmentation, of rising protectionism. We saw Biden continue and in some cases increase tariffs that the Trump administration had put in place. And this is driven by a sense of concern. Like, energy matters again. That's why I'm glad we're doing this panel. And what I mean by that is, like, we sort of became complacent for a few decades. Like, we developed a collective amnesia after the 1970s because we took energy security for granted. And we were talking, and we should talk, absolutely. I mean, I am proud to have helped create the new Columbia Climate School about climate and sustainability, but along with that, the goals of energy security and affordability. And we've been shaken from that complacency in the last few years, partly because of the energy crisis that Europe went through, partly because of what we're seeing around the world with price impacts today, the struggle that developing countries have to access the energy that they need, and because of this new world of great power competition we're in, and viewing China in many respects as an adversary. And so trying to make sure that we're diversifying supply chains, that we're not too dependent. I think what we need there, it's again part of the role of a place like SIPA, or the Center on Global Energy Policy, is rigorous critical thinking to really figure out what matters and what doesn't, so everything doesn't sort of become lumped together. Like, depending on one country to import the daily flow of energy you need, like oil, is simply not the same thing as depending on one country for manufactured products that you install to generate electricity, like a solar panel. The risks of disruption in the supply chain are different. And when we talk about a small yard and a high fence, and then you see multiple competing policy priorities like winning the state of Michigan and creating jobs in the United States and national security, and these all get talked about in one way, and then we lump all of energy together. And the truth is, if you're highly dependent on China for 90% of your advanced semiconductors with sensitive military applications, that's probably a risk. If you're heavily dependent on China for a manufactured product like a solar panel, it's not as obvious that's a risk. And then something like an electric vehicle and a battery might be somewhere in the middle. I just think we have to have a more nuanced conversation about what problem we're trying to solve, what the actual risks are, how to de-risk, which doesn't mean make everything at home and disconnect yourself from the global economy, and then recognize that I think we're not taking seriously enough the tension between these goals. If you want a faster energy transition, you need clean energy to be cheaper, not more expensive. And the scale and magnitude of the growth we need, the supply chains are so monumental. The idea that with some tariffs on China and some IRA subsidies and some friendshoring, we can replicate this and dramatically reduce China's footprint in any meaningful time frame is unlikely to happen. And so we have to grapple with the tension between those two things more than we are.
Do you, and I appreciate, I think the two of you agree on a lot. So even though it's nice to see across the aisle agreement, don't get me wrong. Two questions. One, what do you see as if not between the two of you, points of contention on the horizon here at home? For example, the public policymakers in terms of this administration's energy policy, and were all the tech titans at the inauguration, are they sort of all on board with this energy directive? I mean, can we expect any tension?
Yeah, I don't want to speak for Paul. I mean, but we just, for those who want more of us, I just spent an hour talking with Paul on my podcast, which is a weekly conversation with an energy leader. And I think one of the areas where I don't know if it was your view, but you were trying to articulate the view of the incoming administration when you talk about, is climate a priority or not? Like, how do we think about it in the context of these other priorities? And I think the view is, we saw emissions go down the last Trump administration. Clean energy is progressing. And I guess what I would say is over the last decade or so, I think the evidence shows we did reduce emissions in the US. A big part of that was cheap gas replacing coal. That doesn't continue in perpetuity. Like, if you want to solve an environmental problem, it's unlikely that the market alone is going to figure this out just because it turns out that clean energy is the cheapest way to produce it. We have a negative externality, we're emitting pollution, and the role of government is to correct that market failure, and we need stronger climate policy in order to do that. I think one area of agreement is, I'm usually like pretty pessimistic, glass half empty, but there is a part of me that sees an opportunity to make progress on all of these things, because one of the things I found striking about the emergency order, President Trump declared a national energy emergency. And you might wonder why that is the case when we have pretty cheap gas. Energy prices are 4 times in Europe what they are here, not to mention parts of the world that are struggling to afford any energy at all. A big part of that wasn't about drill, baby, drill. It was about electricity and the power sector, modernizing our grid. How do we compete for leadership with China, particularly in the area of AI? And we know AI takes a lot of electricity. There's a big opportunity there to find common ground, in my view, on permitting reform, to make it easier to build infrastructure, on nuclear, which we absolutely need for energy security and decarbonization, carbon capture and removal technology, a set of tools in the toolkit that, frankly, the left hasn't always acknowledged the importance of as much as perhaps we should, in addition to solar and wind. And the pendulum's going to swing back. Like, given what is in store for us from the impacts of climate change, we can't be this complacent a decade or two from now. So the pendulum will swing back, I hope. There will be an urgency to addressing that a bit more than today. And it is possible that we'll have a stronger set of tools in the toolkit to do that, because we're going to focus, hopefully, in a way that generates support across the aisle for make it easier to build infrastructure, build a more robust set of tools. Some of that will be natural gas for sure, but some of it's going to be lower carbon technologies that we need to firm up our grid as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll jump on the grenade about the differences. I'm speaking as someone who helped build 40 to 50,000 megs of wind and solar over my life, including currently at a company I'm on the board of. And I traded electricity. Wind and solar has certain positives, and there are certain negatives. And I think one of the kind of differing points is that some people have thought that wind and solar is like the be-all and end-all. Mm-hmm. It doesn't come close, okay, in terms of anyone who, if you trade electricity, about it being available. And lithium-ion batteries don't solve it. We won the Nobel Prize, okay, for lithium-ion when I was undersecretary. It was kind of my day job of funding technologies. It was a wonderful day, and it was a great American invention. It's too expensive to be base load required for at night. It only runs for 4 hours. That doesn't really, and at the cost, doesn't really work. Mm-hmm. So we need to develop new technologies. And I think the focus area around, rather than building old technologies, is that the way we solve our problems is that we still need to invent the future. So we're just announced the first fusion plant. You heard me correct. Fusion plant, right? And it's probably going to take 10 years, but it might actually get done. And we're going to start making electricity from hydrogen like the sun. And so that's an example of something which is better than wind and solar if we can get there. So I think whether we use as current and whether is efficacious versus what do we actually need to build to accomplish what we need to. I think that's kind of a difference sometimes that you hear in the debate, and clearly you're hearing from my voice that seizing the horizon, right, and inventing the future. I was Undersecretary for Science running Los Alamos. I mean, it's kind of my book, but I think that's a difference that you'll see in policy.
What, can I ask quickly, because we're now negative 11, 12 seconds, so in 30 seconds each, we talked beforehand about nuclear resurgence, and that sounds like that might be on the horizon.
Yeah, that's my home base. I'm a nuclear engineer. I ran a reactor when I was younger. Nuclear works. It's worked for a very long time. It's baseload. The problem with nuclear is that it's very hard to seemingly to build on time and on budget, meaning it's expensive. And that's the biggest problem with nuclear. It's been a big pickup, especially from the tech sector. A number of announcements for new nuclear. Macron in France just announced a new nuclear deal with AI, new development in France. So it's certainly seeing a great light in today's environment, but it is really important for the people who are building it to try to be on time and on budget.
Yeah, we need it for energy security, affordability, for modernizing and stabilizing our grid. We absolutely need it for achieving our climate goals, and we need permitting reform. We need to advance the technology, but the new factor we have is AI and these hyperscalers and massive companies with enormous amounts of money to spend who care about their green credentials and are looking for power. Now, this isn't going to happen overnight, but the fact that they're putting real money into it, bringing forward in time both existing and advanced nuclear technology, I think is reason for some optimism.
Thank you, Paul and Jason, and we are so grateful for this across the aisle conversation. We're going to have so many more of these at SIPA, and thank you, everyone.
Please welcome back to the stage Dean Karen Yarhi-Milo.
Well, how did you enjoy this? That's the talented SIPA. Well, that concludes our SIPA in DC event this evening. I cannot thank you enough for joining us. I hope you take to heart the energy and urgency in this room and let it inspire you to keep engaging, to stay in touch with us. And evenings like this are sparks. We look forward to growing the flame. And we can't wait to continue this conversation. And to our entire DC network, we appreciate you. We're here for you. We promise you will see more of SIPA in the months and years ahead. And for the alumni here with us, your next professional chapter might begin in this very room. So please reconnect with our school, our vibrant alumni community, and our incredible, energized, passionate students. And to everyone here, encourage, please, talented people to apply to SIPA. SIPA is here to train emerging generations of solution-oriented thinkers and policymakers. Thank you so much for being with us today.